Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.
Hello, my name is Andrew Faas, and welcome to Following the Golden Rule.
And I'm Jay Remer, and for 26 weeks, Andy and I will be discussing the ABCs of leadership. And we've been working on this now for several months, and we have covered half the alphabet, and we've gotten quite a lot of positive feedback from the audience. What has your general impression been of how the feedback has come in so far and how we're resonating with the audience?
Well, I think it's resonating quite well with a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And I can tell how it's resonating with me in doing it. I've just come out of 2 weeks of quarantine and like many others have been housebound for the last number of months. And it's given me an opportunity to reflect on what we're doing and why we're doing it, and looking at it in a different way than when I started. And today we're going to be talking about O is for observant. So one of the things that helped me in terms of dealing with this particular topic is being observant in terms of how I am following the golden rules or following the various characteristics that make up a leader of character, and certainly observing others.
Well, I've found that it is, observant is a great word because it applies to all of the characteristics that we discuss. And observing how we incorporate those characteristics into our lives and actions, as you say, has been very revealing, because I've found the same thing. It's like, oh. So I think that this whole action of self-reflection has been a positive one, and the feedback, I think, reflects it. But today's letter, O, is for observant. How do you define being observant, and how do we start being more observant?
Well, I'm not sure there's a starting point or end point on the word itself or the characteristic itself. And being observant is kind of factoring in everything you should factor in. And it's not dissimilar to M is for mindful. And but it's hearing what is unsaid. And observant is a very interesting word because it's kind of non-judgmental, and it is non-judgmental. It is what it is, and I often say it's my observation, and sometimes people misinterpret that as being my opinion,
right, or
being my what I conclude, and usually it's not. It helps me form a conclusion, but it does not necessarily mean that I've concluded. And when people argue with me on what I've observed, my basic reaction is, please don't deny me what I'm observing. Deny me what conclusion I reach, but don't deny me what I'm observing.
Well, it's interesting. What just comes to mind is the importance of collecting various perspectives from people. If we don't listen to what other people's perspectives are, we really can't develop our own to its highest potential. And that's very much what observing is you're not necessarily judging what other people are saying, you're just listening to what they have to say, and sometimes it makes sense and you can incorporate it into your philosophy, and sometimes it can be discarded quite easily, but you can't do either if you don't observe and listen without judgment.
And listening to the unsaid. And much of what I relate to is in the working environment, and that's something that I've studied over the last well, really throughout my career. And as you grow in an organization or grow to becoming a leader, what you'll find is people will not tell you what you need to hear. And that means that you have to rely on your other senses to be able to really see and hear to help you reach a conclusion, or maybe even more importantly, to help you help somebody else. We follow the golden rule. This statistic I keep using over and over and over again is what we've concluded through a now 50,000 person survey with Mental Health America and the Faas Foundation, and that 3/4 of people cannot count on their co-workers for support when things go bad. And we're continuing that research, and we know that number is increasing.
Is that right?
Yeah, and we don't have the full findings of it yet. But part of it is working remotely, not having the interaction. But part of it is people, and there are great examples where people have reached out and helped people. But what the numbers are starting to tell us is that it's not near where it should be. And if there's one objective I have in life, I guess, is to kind of reverse that number significantly, particularly with what people are going through.
So, Andy, one of the things that I've noticed in the last few decades since the onset of computer technology is there is a decided difference between from how we communicate. And I'm wondering whether or not you see a difference in how we observe things with the onset of technology.
Well, certainly you don't have the benefit of being able to read the body language or the facial expressions, although you can to some extent through the Zoom technology, and that certainly helps. So what you have to rely again on is what you're not hearing. And if you don't see it, it's a disadvantage. But one of the most observant people is in history is Helen Keller, who couldn't see nor hear, and she became one of the most effective observers and communicators by using her other senses. And she dug deeply in terms of what does her heart tell her, and what's her heart and soul observing. And I think we can learn a lot from how she saw and heard and observed the world and the dynamics that go on. Just getting back to what leaders are not observing, seeing or hearing, and the number of situations where there's been bullying and harassment and and mental illness, and suicides and attempted suicides. When people look back and say, how is it this happened? Weren't there indicators? Weren't there red flags? And in my experience, there's always red flags. And let's just deal with suicides. World Health Organization indicated that this year there are going to be 800,000 suicides.
Wow.
So when you compare that to coronavirus to date, it's just 200,000 under coronavirus. And look at the amount of focus on that in terms of understanding and observing and gathering data and learning and from what others have experienced. I would suggest that if the same amount of focus and resources and individual observations, that number can significantly be reduced. The number of attempted suicides, you can multiply that number by 20.
Oh, really?
So if it's just one example, and a very relevant example today, because people today are under more stress than they could ever have imagined in terms of insecurity, in terms of being able to do the fundamentals like feed their families, or not having any idea as to where they're heading from an economic and social perspective. And my bet is that number will increase unless people start being more observant.
Yes.
And not waiting to tell us that they're in difficulty.
That's right.
But looking at some of the signals, because people are generally, I would say, too proud to say, I need help. But when asked, is there anything I can do to help you get through this situation? And here's what I'm observing.
Yeah.
I'm observing a change in you.
Yes.
And we all know couples who are not getting along. And normally they don't duke it out in front of you. But we all can observe the tension.
Yes.
And and that's in any relationship.
That's right. Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that, because I've got two different people that I'm working with at the moment. One who is very reticent to ask for help, and another who is quite willing to ask for help at the drop of a pin. And it's very interesting to see the dynamic, and observing these people is interesting, because you need to act if you want to help them, but you have to respect their boundaries and all that, and getting them to draw out and admit, or not. It's not so much it is an admission of weakness, and we're reticent to do that as humans. We see that as a problem, and so I think that in your examples of, you know, the suicide and the attempted suicides, we need to be more observant of all of the people around us, or we're not going to pick up on the signals that people really need help. Those are extreme examples, but there are simple examples of when people need help, because we're not designed to be able to do everything ourselves. We need help from other people, sometimes lots of other people, to accomplish things. And so I think that if we can be more observant, we can fit in better.
Well, I would say, yeah, absolutely. And the reality is we have interrelationships and we have interdependencies, and no man or woman is an island, and we need to support each other. Mm-hmm. And support comes in a variety of different ways, and we cannot just wait for the ask. We have to anticipate. And I've said that that one of the biggest criteria that I look for in a leader is their ability to observe. Mm-hmm. And in interviewing people for a position, I am observing how observant they are.
That's right.
And do they really see the realities that they're facing? Boards of directors and CEOs, when things have happened in their organizations, they all claimed, that's a surprise. I wasn't aware. Mm-hmm. And Jeff Bezos famously said, when there was a blow up in the newspapers about their work culture, he said, well, that's not the Amazon I know. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's not the Amazon I know is that he was not on the plant floors to observe the real dynamics going on in his operations.
Right.
And people will not or are afraid to tell leadership what they don't want to hear.
That's right.
And so a good leader understands that. Mm-hmm. and goes around and has their ear close to the ground. Mm-hmm. Listens to the scuttlebutt, listens to somebody who's normally quiet, and pulls out from them their impressions or perspectives, and there are a number of techniques that good leaders do mm-hmm. to make sure they know what's going on for the organizations or units that they're responsible for.
Right. So one of the things, shifting slightly, I think it would be interesting to talk about how observant dogs, children, and other people outside of our, we're responsible for, because there's a difference in how they see the world, and I find it fascinating. Being an old dog person, you being a current dog person, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Well, let's start with children.
Okay.
And the word wonder. Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful word.
It is.
Children start off by discovering things, and everything becomes a new discovery and a wonder. And as we go through the school system, we get away from that a little bit, or a lot, where the focus is more on teaching people how to memorize versus discover. Mm-hmm. And learn. Mm-hmm. And I consider myself a lifelong learner, and I am always full of wonder. Mm-hmm. So from child to old man now, I am constantly at wonder. But again, these last number of months have taught us that being observant about things that we kind of took for granted. Mm-hmm. So we were always looking forward to going away on a vacation because we were looking to discover something new. And the only option most of us have now is rediscovering where we live. Mm-hmm. and being observant and savoring that. Mm-hmm. And appreciating it. And this spring, you know, I had the privilege of just sitting in front of my sunroom watching spring arrive. Mm-hmm. And so getting to animals, animals can teach us a lot because they are also discoverers, and they their senses in terms of knowing when I'm upset or I'm happy or I'm sick, they sense that. Mm-hmm. and they respond. They respond, mm-hmm. And together they share their food. They play well together, and the younger one terrorizes the other one to the point where it's almost barbaric.
They play differently.
However, when one of them is not feeling all that well, it's amazing how they protect and they lick a wound or.
Well, you know, it's amazing how people have been able to use animals' senses so effectively to to help us. For instance, they have bomb-sniffing dogs and drug-sniffing dogs and all kinds of dogs that can do things, and it's hard. We can't do it because we don't have those acute senses. But these dogs are actually, their energy is channeled into observing very specific things, and they don't have the judgment around their observations that we have. They reach conclusions immediately. Is this safe or is this not safe? And that's it. And they just move along otherwise. But I find that their power of observing is incredible. We had a bull terrier once who gravitated to this one person whenever she would come over to the house. Just gravitated and would just snuggle up to this person. And over time, we began to put two and two together, and they needed each other for healing. They were healing each other in different ways. One was dealing with an alcohol issue, and another one was dealing, the little dog was dealing with a desire to help. And it was fascinating to watch the dynamic. So I think there's so much that we can learn by observing our own dogs and Mother Nature herself.
Absolutely. And wonderful story this spring with Alfie, the younger one. She's now 2. And she was mesmerized by watching a pair of robins build their nest, hatch the eggs, feed the chicks, and just stood there for hours on the railing, just observing mm-hmm. what was going on mm-hmm. without a bark.
Yeah,
it was wonderful to watch.
Yeah. So this has been a great conversation about the word observant. Do you have anything to add? We have a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is, again, looking at always for being observant as a characteristic, but how it interrelates to all of the other characteristics. So, in particular, I mentioned being mindful. There's an overlap there in terms of factoring all the things necessary to make a good decision. But perhaps the one that really it relates to is being emotionally intelligent. And you can ask people how they feel and why they feel the way they do. But there are other things by observation you can detect how people feel, and not necessarily why they feel the way they do, and that's something you'd have to pull out. But you can usually tell when somebody's angry or happy or elated or the other emotions. But if people are troubled or angry, just that is something that you can observe. And going beyond the observation, being able to do something about it in terms of managing that emotion. And if you can do that with yourself, and you know that person is feeling the same way you are, and likely over the same reason, you can help them manage their emotion so that they make emotionally intelligent decisions versus emotional ones.
Right.
And we're in great danger of people making those emotional decisions, like suicide.
Right.
And so people have looked at emotional intelligence as this soft shit or soft stuff. It's a very hard science, and it's a very hard skill, and it is all about observing.
It is.
Yeah.
And I might add, we do benefit by practicing it on a continuous basis.
As any skill.
As any skill, that's right.
Yeah.
So thank you, Andy, very much for your observations on being observant. And thank you for watching us. And we look forward to joining you next week when we talk about P is for purposeful.
Following the Golden Rule with Andrew Faas is proudly supported by Remax St. Andrews. Live and vacation by the sea. Choose wisely. Choose Remax.